contemporary compulsory state education, it was never about formation. It was never about truth. No. It was never about higher ideas, philosophies, anything. It was about preparing someone for the system of the state and of the society so that they function well in that society. That's what it was all about, and it still is.
Hello, and welcome to, why are we talking about rabbits? Rabbits are things that they seem important, but they're not. They're on the internet, and they're ideas that go bouncing around and reproducing themselves. But really, we should be talking about heavy things, but let's talk about it lightly. Today we do. Father Peter's here. He's a priest. He's going to introduce himself. He's got deep and interesting thoughts. He helps us understand the old world, new world divide. I know it because I grew up with this dude. This is Father Peter Heers on WAWTAR, episode number a lot. Father Peter, what's happening? How are you?
How you doing, John? Good to be back.
It's really good to have you because as someone who shared a room with you for many years in life, now we can't even share a country. What's that about? How's Greece?
Greece is good. It's good. It's under the weight of the lockdown. We probably had more lockdowns here than most of Europe. So, but with summer is coming, so summer is always great in Greece. It's good to be in Greece in the summer.
Do people do their countenances change? What happens? I agree. Summer is brilliant in the Mediterranean, but what happens from your experiences?
Well, I mean, besides getting out of this lockdown reality, that's part of it. And then, but even if we didn't have all this COVID insanity, we would be people would be getting out and spending a lot of time outside. Like here in the village, we're gardening and we're taking a lot more walks, and the day's a lot longer, so we're out. The kids are playing till late. I'm just like everybody else. But it's in the mountains. It's especially nice in the summer, I would have to say. I don't miss the city. It's like 5-6 degrees nicer up here in the mountains.
We've had our battles on the city life versus country life, haven't we?
You're a city lover.
When I walk through the city, I see a forest of human beings, and they're so interesting to me, and they're also hard to get along with sometimes. In the country, you get like real trees, I guess. Quiet.
Well, we like human beings too. It's just that we like to have them, encounter them and enjoy them in an environment that is a little more humane.
Yeah, I mean, I think both of these arguments make sense. It's not really an argument as much as. Could it be that urban life is like not as good for your spiritual life?
Well, I think I mentioned this in the last time I was with you. I mean, the whole urbanization process of the 20th century was very destructive to, I think, a lot of places around the world, but it was definitely in Greece. That's a given. And so I think there is a good case to be made that the uprooting in the 20th century, not just the people leaving Greece and all kinds of countries and going abroad, the United States, but actually leaving the village and going to the city. Probably more people did that than anything. That has had tremendous negative effects spiritually on people. So I think urbanization was not if you weigh it all out, I don't think it was a positive thing for humanity.
I see. Will you do a favor for people tuning in? Just a 2-minute second bio. Who are you? Where are you? What are you doing?
So besides being a part of the Heers clan and your brother, I am an Orthodox priest. Happen to have studied theology for quite a number of years. I have a PhD in dogmatic theology. I'm a professor at this time from afar at the Theological School of Holy Trinity Seminary in Jordanville, New York, upstate New York. But mainly my identity is an Orthodox priest, Orthodox Christian, Orthodox priest, and someone who's, his whole life tries to be dedicated to Christ and tries to fulfill the commandments of Christ. And so that's the paradigm, that's the prism in which reality is interpreted for me. I think that's the best thing to say. You can go on and on about books and translations and all the rest. People can look that up if they want on the internet, but that's the most
We'll put a
important.
link. We'll put a link to Orthodox Ethos website stuff. But yeah, so that's a beautiful. This is really interesting. I don't know if I want to go down the identity rabbit trail, but it is interesting how we all choose to say what our identity is. We do that in my family with my mixed race kids. Like identity kind of ends up being our faith or the church, which is a weird answer in 2021. What's your identity? And then you say like Orthodox Christian. That kind of throws people for a loop. I like it though. It kind of makes sense to me. Maybe there's meta identities. Maybe there's layers of identities, right? Obviously.
Well, actually, I think that's cuts far more to the reality of the human person than this racial, class, cultural identity. Those are things that ultimately do not divide humanity. From the Orthodox Christian perspective, there's only one thing that really divides human beings, and that is faith. Do you believe or do you not believe? Do you accept Christ or you do not accept Christ? That's from our perspective. That's also what it says in the gospel when it talks about Christ and his appearance as a child in the temple. The prophecy of the prophet Simeon was exactly that this will be a sign to be spoken against. He will reveal the hearts of many, and he will essentially be the truth, which, depending on our response to him, we're divided. He doesn't divide us. He calls us all to unity, just like the Feast of Pentecost in the Orthodox Church calls all humanity to a unity in Christ, and that's the identity, the shared identity of. So that cuts to the heart of what it means to be a human being. What are we made in? The image of? Who's our prototype? Who's the archetype? So I think that actually having our identity be our confession of who we believe to is right. God, who we believe we are. Right. It's far more substantial and existential than black, white, city, country, or whatever it might be.
What would you say on that note to folks with the idea that religion, whatever that is, I don't like that word, divides? It seems like that's part of the definition, actually. If you have faith in this, then you are different than if you don't. How do are you comfortable with that in the face of a world that's sort of moving toward we're all practicing the same faith, we just don't always know it?
We don't divide, in other words, push people away or make distinctions, but the truth of itself, when it's rejected or accepted, does that. So Christ says in the gospel that I didn't come to judge the world. I came to save the world, but my words will judge.
Right.
In other words, if we accept them or embrace them or not. And that has to be the case. I mean, if there's truth, if we're not nihilists,
right,
and God forbid we're nihilists, because that's meaninglessness in this world. I think it's a big part of the divide between old world and new world is the old world was definitely based on a tradition, which that tradition was not, at least in the Orthodox perspective, it's not a human tradition, but a divinely inspired, divinely given and preserved tradition,
right,
meaning the life of God in the church throughout the ages. So that was what defined and gave boundaries to and gave perspective to one's life. Whereas we have now the last 2, 3, 4, depending on where you want to draw the demarcation line, we have entered into a period of where much of the West and now much of the world sees that there is no ultimate thing. There is no holy tradition that through which we then come to understand who we are, and there's no ultimate truth. And so, if you accept that there is truth, then inevitably it's going to be, depending on our decision, it's going to be a point of division, but not because it divides, but because we, with our decision, divide ourselves from that and then from one another. Whereas if we embrace it, we have total unity. I think that's the key. But I would take issue that we don't, as Orthodox, believe that we practice a religion at all. So at least in one aspect. Now, if you want to talk about the very basic aspect of religion, meaning that which connects us on a horizontal level, that is a byproduct of our life in Christ, no doubt about it. And that's very essential. So we see unity on two planes. You have a vertical and a horizontal plane. If you have unity with the vertical, with God, you'll have unity on the horizontal plane between men. When that breaks down and there's no unity with God, and obviously there's no glue, there's no spiritual glue, as it were, to hold humanity together. And I think actually that's what we're witnessing in the world today. The world's falling apart before our eyes on many levels. And there's a mad attempt, a crazy attempt to glue it together. But it's being done in a way that is irrespective of truth and
in the vertical plane. There is no transcendent. The vertical plane. Yeah, right. There's no transcendent. Yeah.
There will be, I think, from an Orthodox Christian perspective, that will inevitably come into play again. But who will that be and what will that be? That's the question. There will be an attempt to make it vertical eventually. So it's not satisfactory on the horizontal plane at all.
Right.
Like communism was not satisfactory, did not satisfy the human person's quest for origins and ultimate things. Right. So it only had a horizontal and a forced horizontal unity, right? Mm-hmm. So it fell away as a system, but in some ways it didn't fall away at all. It's being propped up and it's being promulgated again in a different form, maybe.
Well,
but
as a utopian alternative to the vertical plane, I think if people are wondering, vertical is the transcendent, that which defines me as as living a divine life, but on the horizontal plane, right? I'm both and one at the same time. I'm here and I'm there, right? Am I making any sense?
Yeah.
And so when the horizontal becomes emphasized or overemphasized, that's a type of utopian worldview that really now worships false gods on the worldly plane, communism being one of those worldviews.
Yeah, and communism is just one of many attempts at utopianism. I think it was preceded by many other attempts within the Protestant, especially Christian context, right? So you actually there are many forced attempts at utopian horizontal unity within certain Protestant sects in the 15th, 16th, 17th century, and they were actually seen as predecessors by the communists to their own system. So that's very interesting because obviously the communists, for the most part, were atheists and they rejected God and they wanted to overthrow all religion, period. But yet they had these predecessors within the Protestant Christian context who were clearly utopianists. They thought that they would achieve things on earth.
Right. For the world, by the world. That's the trick. This is for the world, by the world. But that's nihil, right? Because in the end, the world itself doesn't hold meaning without its communion with God.
You see how we immediately cut all the way down into like cosmology and creation and what is the world? You can't avoid it. It's so amazing. When you get into these questions, they're all interconnected. You cannot really find any sense to life ultimately if you don't connect everything. Everything has to come back to a unity, and it's just it's actually just awesome.
Well, there is a narrative, right? There's a universal narrative that Christians would call it. It's the narrative of it's logos, and it's winding its way through history. And if you have the eyes to see, you see the story unfolding, having unfolded in human temporal time, having been unfolded, but is unfolding even before us. The hard thing is to have the eyes to see, I think. I think that's the spiritual life, right? Is to gain those eyes, is to gain that vision.
Yeah, you could be actually a practicing member of the Orthodox Church, even speaking from my own experience. And because you're ignorant of or indifferent to the deeper
can't we
things
just
of
be weak?
life,
Can't we just be unable? Or
what's that?
Not, or too immature as of this moment? Can't we be that too?
Sure, it's a process. However you want to describe it, it's just, I mean, there's different reasons why, but if ultimately, I think it comes back to a lack of a love of truth above all else. That's what the Lord says in the gospel, to love and seek the truth above all else, and it will set you free. So, that's a general way of describing a variety of that happens in a variety of ways for a variety of reasons for everyone, right? Yeah. There's a whole spectrum of, but it's that lack, which even if you're in the Orthodox Church and you're saying, I'm going to struggle for this ideal, you could still walk blindly through history and not see things. And I think actually we're living in one of those time periods where there is an elephant in the room and people are literally looking past it and ignoring it. And we could get into that discussion. I think COVID is one of those in our day.
Let's do that.
Amazing.
Let's go that way. So there's two ideas I heard pop out there. You reminded me of the concept of martyr. It feels like maybe the martyr is the one seeing the elephant in the room, and then the elephant keeps squeezing the martyr into the corner until it like squeezes the breath out of him. And he's like, there's an elephant in here. And is that kind of what happens to the martyr? Is they see something that other people don't see and they're unwilling to compromise, and then death befalls them? Does that sound like I'm describing a martyr?
Yeah. Well, this has happened innumerable times throughout history. So it's not something so unique to our day, but I think it is happening again. There is, from my perspective, a kind of phenomenon of willful, massive, blindness to a whole narrative that's being presented to humanity, and for whatever reason, for fear, for a variety of special interests and all kinds of things, people are choosing not to face that narrative and say, what is this really all about? Let's examine this. So the one who speaks out and says, no, actually the emperor has no clothes. Actually, these initiatives, these governmental programs, all of these things that are being forced on humanity, the lockdowns and all this stuff, actually it's naked. They're naked. Actually, they actually don't. They're not justifiable. They're not substantiated. And so that person, at least in the popular media, I'm not sure if it actually is the case on the ground in all communities, but in the popular media, that person becomes a heretic. But look, if you go back to the 20s in Russia, you go back to the 30s in Germany, you go back to a variety of periods where there was a narrative that you had to believe to be a politically acceptable person in that community. There was a minority view who were the witnesses, the martyrs, and they were mocked and rejected, and many of them died in exile or were martyred and all the rest. Today we celebrate them. Today we recognize them, or at least some people do. And that's I think we're in that, there's a lack of a love of truth in a massive way in our society today. I mean, people are living for the most part, and this is what is the predecessor to this state, right? Before you could get to the point where the Bolsheviks could literally, just year after year slaughter millions of people, hundreds of thousands of priests and bishops and monasteries and it goes on and on, but also just all kinds of human beings who spoke out against their narrative. How did you get there? Well, there was obviously a great indifference to truth long before the Bolshevik or the Nazi or whoever you want to put that came to power in a untruthful way. There was a lack of love of truth long before that. Do you think that inattentiveness to truth, let's call it that, do you think that is born out of what we call the New World rationalist philosophy of the Enlightenment? You think that the Enlightenment is a contributor to the notion that truth might be relative, or at least only known in material reality? Well, the Enlightenment is absolutely a watershed time, which changes the paradigm in the West. And you move from, a religious faith of alpha, a religious faith, into a deism. And then, got any kind of real impact of God in the world is relegated, is rejected. And so the vertical is essentially ejected. And so once that happens, then there's going to be, how can there be love of truth after that? Right. Right. Well, see, this is one of the things. Do you know Uncle Seth, who comes on our show? He's my dear buddy. I've told you about him. Yeah. Go back and watch one. Let's make a deal. I'll come to your classes. You come to mine. Mom will like that. Want to do it? Sure. I'm not going to miss even one of these. You're teaching a class right now online on the Bolshevik. Russian New Martyrs. Yeah, Russian New Martyrs. Church. Yeah. I'm there, but you got to come. Let's say you got to watch 10 podcasts of mine. 10. I got 10. It's 10-week class. So 10,
you have a 10-week?
10. All right, gotcha.
I'm scared of that though. Like I get to pick
my classes 10. My classes are 2 hours and 15, 20 minutes.
Ooh.
So your podcasts are a lot shorter, right? So
that's how
I guess I gotta watch 20.
Okay, we'll do 20. You do a 20 pod course. It's going to be great. You're going to be so educated. And then people who'd actually listen to the pod are going to go, no, he's not, John. He's going to have wasted his life. Listen, we'll do that and mom will be super happy. But that aside, so the martyr in the end can see something and is willing to say it to a point of death. Is this a martyr? Is this a new period of martyrdom coming our way if you're trying to hold tight to the narrative of Logos, to Christ resurrected? Is this the time, or are we too hyped about this?
In the Orthodox Church, we've got several witnesses to the fact that we are on the verge of a time of confessing confessors and martyrs. And I can tell you,
this? How do you know these things? I tend to agree as a history guy, but are you listening to
I'll give you two examples. I'll give you two amazing examples. Right here?
Yeah, I do.
All right. So about 35 years ago in Greece, there's a great teacher of the faith, Athanasius Metelineos, great, holy. I think he'll be glorified as a saint one day, but he has actually about 8,000 homilies that circulate in the Greek language. He gave twice a week for 30 years or something.
Was he Athens?
He was in Laodicea in central Greece. Anyway, he was talking and somebody asked him, why are we seeing a revival in the 1970s and 80s in the Orthodox Church here in Greece? There was a revival, let's say, revival is not the term they use, but a real renewal of monasticism, monastic life on Mount Athos here, just an hour and a half to the east of me, which is the center of monastic life in the Orthodox Church around the world. And there was literally, people said it was going to die in the 1960s. They said, oh, monasticism's dead. It's going to close down. This 1,000-year monastic republic that had produced so many Orthodox saints throughout the ages, that's actually at its end. They literally predicted it will die in the 1970s. And the exact opposite happened. There was a massive renewal, and there were hundreds and thousands of young men who wanted to become monks on Mount Athos. And so today we have around 2,500 monks on Mount Athos, most of them from Greece, young, and a lot of them are young men. Anyway, so somebody asked the elders, this teacher about Athanasius, why is that? Why are we witnessing this? How do you explain this? And he said, well, let me explain to you. And it was totally, I think nobody expected this answer, right? He said, if you go back to Russia in the 19th century, and you look at what happened before the onslaught of the Bolshevik Revolution, when in fact for decades, people were saying there's secularism, there's apostasy going on in Russia. Russian people are falling away from Orthodoxy Christianity. They're becoming secularists. They're becoming enlightened, rationalists. And at the same time, there was this massive renewal and influx of monastics and monasteries in places like Optina and Valam. And he said that happened in order to prepare the people for the crucifixion and the martyrdom that was coming and that came with the Bolshevik Revolution. So he said, why are we having this now to prepare us for the days of persecution and martyrdom which are lying ahead? So that was a prophetic word from Elder Athanasius. And actually, we haven't seen any kind of bloodshed to date. But what we do see is a tremendous turnaround, I would say, in the last 20 years, where we had these amazing, charismatic, wonder-working, amazing figures in the Orthodox Church in the 1980s and 90s. Today, we have a grave crisis in the church in terms of spiritual leadership and all the rest. So that's just one.
So that's a sign. Okay.
One prophetic word from a very great teacher. Also, somebody who's in the church today, who's an amazing figure, Metropolitan Neophytos of Morphu in Cyprus. He said, and so I'm going off what his stance. He said the 20th century was the century of great ascetics, great monastics, great people of prayer and fasting and all the rest. Whereas the 21st century, he said, will be an age of the confessors and the martyrs. And so that's the vision of these very wise spiritual fathers. But I would say that most anybody can see what's going on in the world today, where it's going. There's a totalitarianism that's on the rise everywhere, regardless of the church or not, there's a grave threat of totalitarianism all over the world today.
So that's the answer. Really cool. And then what I'm really interested in is the methodology there. Like an icon writer, your words paint a picture, but they aren't your words. They're words that you're retrieving from a traditional past, just like an icon writer is retrieving images and then adding, not really adding, right? But from applying. And so that's really, I feel like that is a characteristic of old world reality, not just Orthodox, but in general. I see that again and again when we travel and work, is everything is a reach back to explain what's going forward. Mm-hmm. But the new world, we don't roll like that. Everything is somehow like I invented it brand new or something. Like only I could have shown you this brand new thing that never existed. So I just wanted to point that the methodology, even in your words, is similar to the iconography.
This is so ingrained not in the, I would say, the old world, but it's from an Orthodox, Greek Orthodox perspective. This is so ingrained in the whole outlook of the Orthodox Christian, is that we draw on all the spiritual treasures of the past in order to live and then to understand the present and the future. It's very fundamental. But
does that reduce your ability to be a, quote, an individual? Do you have ideas of your own? Are you trying to acquire ideas of your own?
Well, but that would be true only if identifying with the truth and tradition was somehow anti-individualistic. I mean, why does that follow? They're not opposed. The individuals, I mean, the whole idea that the individual has to live and recreate. I mean, this is very, frankly, this is very Protestant, right? The Protestant idea is worship has to be free and spontaneous every Sunday. We shouldn't go back to any tradition or any liturgical life or anything else. Otherwise, it's seen as just rote and external and ritualistic. And so, but that's actually not true at all. The structure and the boundaries do not nullify. They actually help the individual to find his identity and his meaning in his life. Right. I think the destruction of the boundaries, the destruction of tradition, it means that the person's left at sea. Yeah.
You see this, again, heavy things lightly. You see this with the team that I hate, the New England Patriots, but they have a Patriot way that's basically being handed down year after year through a type of person who is holding on to a tradition, Belichick, who's actually trying to teach people who come in to get rid of what they might think of their individual expression on the football field. He's trying to knock that out of them because something has been beautified. They play a beautiful game and win a lot of Super Bowls. So, of course, it's not the same because, again, I'm on the horizontal plane with that example. But I think people can hear that, which is, welcome to the Patriots. It's time for you to, in some ways, think less about your own ideas and more about what we do here within this tradition. It does rankle people, though. I mean, but so what? Who cares? How about this question for you? I got another one. In light of this kind of playing out, this cultural sort of disintegration, some people in history, like in the Chinese tradition, what they say is the things happening in culture are actually representative of a spiritual reality. So you can see, for instance, the Chinese mandate of heaven, when there was an earthquake or there were plagues, then they would say, oh, the emperor is no longer in union with the divine. The emperor has lost his way, therefore get rid of the emperor. In some ways, is COVID that for you? Do you see COVID as connected in some way to spiritual decay? Is there some? Well,
it's interesting. It's interesting you bring that up because I mean, we wouldn't see like I don't know if this is implied in what you're saying, but I would say as Orthodox, we wouldn't see nature taking on some kind of personality or life of its own, but obviously, we would see God's hand in all of our life, including nature. So there's nothing accidental. There is nothing that is luck. There's no luck in the world. So right. So that means that everything has a meaning. And the question is, do we have the interpretive key to understand reality? That's the whole struggle of acquiring the mind of Christ and the wisdom of the saints in order to understand reality. And it's interesting because, for instance, there'll be natural disasters today. Most people, because they're rationalists, they don't see the hand of God in their life. They will not attribute anything to natural disasters as a part of a message or a lesson, a pedagogical hand in history that shows people back to the path of unity and of identity and of fulfillment and all the rest, right? People just say, oh, that's just a natural event that has no meaning beyond how we explain it rationally, scientifically. And that's something that's new. That's new in humanity, because if you go back into history, they definitely saw that God who created this world, God who preserves this world, the providential hand of God, nothing is an accident. So if there is an earthquake or if there is a tidal wave, they're going to say, wait a minute, there's a message here for us. Maybe we're not living according to the archetype, as we're not living according to the prototype. We're not living as God intended for us. But we don't ask those questions today, and so the messages are left. Unfortunately, the many messages we don't get, we don't see, probably because we don't believe or we don't even think that we have to live according to a law or a prototype, or we're called to a communion with a God that loves us. And so therefore it's a symptom of a loss of meaning in life.
But, we don't have to live according to a prototype. I mean, human beings don't. The prototype calls us to health, right? The God-man calls us to health. But the Dostoevskian in me is like, you don't have to live that way, but you will live unhealthy. No one's going to make you live that way, right? No.
It's got to be free. I mean, I don't mean this mean we have to, as we're forced to. People are free, and if we weren't free, we wouldn't be made in the image and likeness of God, according to the Orthodox perspective on things. So yes, and actually going and trying to and being forced to live according to any kind of archetype, prototype, or what would be contrary to God's love. So it has to be freely embraced. There's no question about it, or it doesn't have any meaning. Actually, I think that's what I want to say. It wouldn't have meaning if we were all forced into it. It'd be pointless. Just like it is on a horizontal level between human beings, like a relationship that's truly blessed and loving and joyful is done because there's two human beings who joyfully, freely embrace that relationship. That's the same with God as well.
I know about you, and people have learned about you on the interwebs. And there is a sense that when you're speaking, there's some sort of, the American, the American Democratic Republican, the great tradition is watch out for the clerics. I don't think people fully understand that America is built on the idea is watch out for the clerics. And so here comes a cleric who speaks in forceful ways, named Father Peter. And I think in the American Republican tradition, small r, people get like, whoa, dude, what are we going to live by all your like cloaked laws, all of your cassocked laws? Like there's a terrible fear on one level that there's some force behind your words that will turn all of your conversations into the Inquisition or something. So what do you say to that?
Well, we were, as Orthodox Christians, I mean, I think it's just, on one level, it's understandable because the paradigm in the West was Protestant Roman Catholic, and there was the Inquisition and other things like that. And that's actually a sign of disintegration of Christian life when that kind of thing happens. It's not at all a sign of true Christian life. And as Orthodox, we've actually, I mean, the church is always officially, and in the saints, the official organs of church teaching, we've always been rabidly against anything like that. And actually, we've been on the suffering end of that most of history. I mean, the Orthodox Church has been persecuted since the fall of the Roman Empire in the 15th century of Constantinople. We've been successively persecuted again and again and again through the Ottoman Empire and then through the communist, atheist, militant atheism. So we've seen 500 years of martyrdom at the hands of that kind of spirit of totalitarianism. So I think the Orthodox if people really understood and knew about Orthodoxy, of course there are exceptions. I'm not saying they're not exceptions. Anytime there's worldly power in the hands of sinful men, even if they call themselves Orthodox, then bad things can happen. But as the church, as the saints, as the voice of the holy ones that we look to as our authority, that has never been and never will be, could not be an expression of our life in Christ. So I would say that it's understandable, but it is ignorance on the part of people because they don't know about Orthodoxy. They don't know the history of Orthodoxy, the Orthodox Church. So they see a priest and they associate that person, that image with whatever they know, which is usually pretty dismal, like very little, if
dismal.
anything.
It's a good word, actually.
Yeah. And so, but actually the Orthodox Church is the most committed of all the Christian traditions to freedom, true freedom in Christ, not just the spiritual freedom, the ultimate freedom, which is freedom from the passions, which is what life in Christ should and is aiming at bringing, but also the basic human freedom of freely wanting to be whatever it is. Right? We very much. I don't know of any spiritual father, and certainly my experience in my spiritual life is that anytime you see someone, reacting, the spiritual father would say, "Leave it be. Do not push. Do not.
I've heard that.
Do not shove. Do not do any of that. Is nothing good will come of it." So that's on a very basic day-to-day level in family life and in communal life. That nothing good comes of trying to force people into, even if it is objectively good, right? You should not kill. You should not commit adultery. It's obviously something that's going to be destructive to you and everybody else. Even then, if the person doesn't understand, will not listen, does not have ears to hear, the spiritual father will say, leave him be. He has to come, or she has to come to the conclusion through their own experience.
This, I have to tell you, is when I realized that I would be Orthodox. Because I was a Westerner and I was raised on all those stories of Western Christianity. And there's a lot of beauty in that. But there was always a control factor I never understood. I felt it in my bones. And it was moralism. I get it. Be good. But there was something missing. And it's that, what you just said. And especially when I started to consult with Orthodox priests before my conversion, I started to realize these cats are not trying to direct me. Of course, they're trying to direct me. That's not what I meant. But there was something missing in their direction that was actually not missing, but it was the presence of beauty and freedom. And it was just a little different. It wasn't coded. It wasn't like an algorithm I had to attend to. A plus B plus C, bam, happiness. It was a much messier and more beautiful event whenever I was counseled by priests and monks. So I really get that. And I think it's the
humility is the key to all of that. True humility, true self-knowledge. If I as a priest really know myself and I see my sins, and as every human being, if we see ourselves truly who we are, we will never, and we could not turn to our brother and stand in an accusatory way and say, you're not this, you're not that. I mean, we might admonish them pedagogically. I'm not saying that's not going to be a part of it. If our role is that, right? If we have that authority to do that, they've freely given us that authority because they know as a doctor or as a teacher, that's the role you play. That's different. But not to stand as one who can judge. No one except God can judge the inner life of a human being and where they're at and what they're going through. Yeah, man. And so you have to. So humility demands that we don't go there. Yeah. And that control thing that you're talking about.
Yeah, there are so many beautiful fruits from that, but it's hard. I can remember one of my daughters crying out literally as a senior, as she was trying to apply for colleges. Why won't you guys tell me what to do? We're like, because it's your life and I think it looks good. I don't know. We'll find out. And she was just like, make it happen for me. And I really saw like the fruits of a crazy faith that we took on as a family. And it was hard. It was really hard to watch her. And you know what? It's okay. But I love that. So why are you a priest? so you can
Well,
give that
so why
kind
am
of
I
advice?
personally, like subjectively, why is Father Peter decide, to accept ordination, or why does one become a priest? What does it mean to be a priest? What's your question?
Well, there's some juicy stuff in both of those. Do 20 seconds like when you got hit over the head to be a priest, and then let's do the theological or metaphysical conversation.
Well, anybody who tells you that they knew what it meant to be a priest before they became a priest is either stupid or lying. Mm-hmm. So I think we see it from afar, and there's an inner attraction and I think it comes down to basically, I want to be in church. I want to be in that place where I feel the grace of God. I want to be close to God. And so I said to my spiritual father 20 whatever years ago, I want to be either a monk or a priest, because I want my life to be dedicated to God. I don't want to live for anything else. I don't want to have anything above that desire and that service. I want to be. And then he did. And then he, through a process, and we together through a process, of discerning God's will and my spiritual makeup, it was understood that I should be a priest. And so I left Mount Athos, where I was, and I came back and went to the theological school. So I think it's not that, being people talk about you have a calling and all that. It's really simple. Like, you fall in love with God, with truth incarnate, and all the beauty that is the revelation of Jesus Christ, and nothing else satisfies you. And that's true with the one who goes into the monastery or the priesthood, I think. It's also true in human relationships. I mean, we do that on a human, more mundane, but also very important level. We have human relationships, and then ultimately, of course, in a marriage. And it's not like, well, why did you choose that woman and not that woman? Or why did you, it's not, you can't really break it down and analyze it like a scientist. It's a movement of the heart, and where you find deep peace. So that's the personal aspect. But why is a priest necessary? And why do people become priests? Mm-hmm. Because the priesthood of Christ, the salvific economy that he brought, how he brings us to himself, is worked out in the church through the offering of the Eucharist, what he commanded before he went to his crucifixion, and all the rest that goes on in the church. That has to be offered by human hands. He ordained it that way. He said to his disciples, all that you loose on earth and bound on earth will be bound in heaven, and loose in heaven. So he gave that, and he wanted it that way. Christ wanted that his presence in the church would be worked through human beings. Now, some people say, well, yeah, but why priests and not the rest? Actually, every Christian is a priest, is a part of the priesthood. Every Christian that is initiated into Christ is a prophet, like Christ was, and is a king like Christ was. Christ had three, let's say, characteristics, or they saw offices. They call it offices in the West, I think. Prophet, priest, and king. And that was not for his benefit, but for our benefit. And so all of us in the church who live in Christ are called to that identity and those things, that role and those functions. Some of them in different ways, though, right? The priesthood of all the believers in the church is different than the particular priesthood of one who's ordained to offer up the mysteries and offer up the Eucharist in the church.
Particularity. So it's
but it's all about living in Christ in all aspects and in all roles in the church. It's one life in Christ that we're all called to live. So anyway, that's a very quick answer on that deep theological question.
Just take one more step down that road for me. And so women are not the particular type of priest. Women are priests in that description in terms of the universality of the priesthood as Christians. What about an ordained priest? Why aren't women that in the Orthodox tradition?
Well, simply put, because God didn't ordain that. God didn't teach that, and he didn't show that, and he didn't impart that to his apostles or to any of his disciples. And for 2,000 years, that's never been even an issue or a question in the Orthodox Church. So, I mean, we could talk about the prototype and theological issues, but I think ultimately in the Orthodox Church, we are recipients of the teaching of the Lord and the apostles that's handed down both verbally and written in a written way. And that's a presupposition for being a disciple of Christ. You can't talk about I am not a disciple of Christ if I don't receive that and seek to live that out and then to pass it on. The minute that I say I'm going to change that, then I'm no longer a disciple of Christ. And so if we were to today in the Orthodox Church say, we've done this for 2,000 years, this is what we've been taught and lived. These are the roles, by the way, of men and women. There's different roles in the church. It's not about power. In the West, it's all about power. It's this whole Marxist, empowered versus victim, this whole paradigm, which was never part of the church and never will be. And so people look at it always in terms of, well, you don't want people to have power. It's all about power, women, men having power over women. That is a paradigm and a idea that is so foreign to the Christian church it's just bizarre because our life in the church doesn't speak to any of that. We don't have these issues in the Orthodox Church. But if we were to just say, well, we're in the 20th century, we need to modernize the church today and let's start introducing things that make sense to modern people. Well, we would no longer be disciples of Christ. Period. We would put that on the shelf and create a new church or create a different church or different ideas about life, and that would be tragic because we would walk away from Christ ultimately. People maybe not don't get that, but that's the reality. You can't do that and say I'm a faithful. It says St. Paul says in one of his epistles, the church submits to Christ. How do we do that? Do we do that in our head? Do we do that? We do that by following faithfully everything that was handed down to us and not changing it. That's how we do that.
So baptism is a type of initiation into becoming a Sherpa. You're carrying something that was handed down, and your job is to carry it and not break it. I think of Sherpas going up the mountain. They know the way, but they're not there to tell you all about the new side paths. Here's what we're taking up the mountain, and I'm going to get you there. And is that what's happening? We're carrying something. We're carrying the pearls of wisdom. We're carrying Christ. What are we doing? What are we carrying?
Well, we're definitely, especially the clergy and those who are given the task and the role, have a tremendous responsibility to pass on what has been given, because all of that together, that whole image and that whole life is salvation. In other words, it's life in Christ. So if you turn away from that in any way, you have forfeited your duty, so to speak. But it's deeper than that. It's not on that. It's on that level, but it's also much deeper than that. In other words, it is the fulfillment of what it means to be a human being. It's the identity of the human person who lives in communion with his maker, and therefore it finds fulfillment and purpose and meaning in this life. That's why you're baptized. That's why you become an Orthodox Christian, because you find your point of your life, the meaning of your life, and you find fulfillment of your life in this church. And anything less would be something that's not salvific and something that's not divine. So I think it has to be that. It has to be that fundamental to the human person.
What should be your role or the role of theology? Or let's put it this way, the narrative of orthodoxy. How should it show up outside of the church? Should it show up in schools? How should it appear? Should it appear? Do we need to have your message inside of a different institution?
You don't need to hear from me to tell you how to live a life that's going to end in the grave. That's not why you need to hear from me. So if people are interested in an eternal life, then I think that it's really important that they turn to the Orthodox Church, because they're going to find the reason for their eternal life, their ultimate meaning of life, the ultimate things. But if the church is going to become a servant as an end in itself, per se, of man's education for this world, in other words, to be a better businessman or to be a better doctor, the church's role is not there. It's not on the social level. The minute that we depart from the heavenly and the eternal and the ultimate things, we become concerned mostly or all entirely with the temporal life of the human being per se as an end in itself, we have forfeited the church. We've departed from the gospel. We've apostatized ultimately.
Okay, so what do you do with your kids?
This is the great temptation today. This is the great temptation for the Orthodox Church today.
So what do you do with your kids? Because your kids, in most Western societies, the structure is that they go over there. And then when they're over there in a public school or even a private school, they're getting ideas and messages that may just lead them to the grave. In other words, like you said, it just might be teaching them how to get into a grave. What do you do? What have you done?
This is something that actually I spent a lot of time and effort on in the last 20 years because I've been very involved in homeschooling as one option to what you're talking about, practically and also educationally, serving ultimately the salvation of man from sin and death, right? So that's education should be in that context. I'm not saying that we're indifferent to it. Don't get me wrong here. I'm not indifferent at all to education. I want it to be in the right context and understood in the right perspective. Yes, we're going to learn a lot of the same things in the church and outside the church that, in terms of history and all the rest, but it's going to be a very different perspective on what those things mean in relation to the ultimate things of life. And so the minute I would never consciously abandon my child to an education that would undermine the ultimate things, that would create an indifference to them, or even become antagonistic to those things. So the minute I see as a parent that my child is being re-educated, so to speak, from what I was teaching, I teach them on a daily basis through my example and through my words and through the teaching of the church. The minute I see that, well, then my duty, if I want to be saved, in the sense that I want to have a good defense before the judgment seat of Christ, I have to say no. I have to resist. I will give an account. I will give an account for how much my child or my children were indoctrinated with things that are contrary to the meaning of life.
So is there something, okay, homeschool, is there something outside of the home? Because we get that. Anybody can argue that, right? I don't know. Santeria cats in Dominican Republic, or the voodoo guys I know in Haiti, who are very cool guys, but they practice voodoo. They want to keep their kids inside the house too. Is there some pedagogy out there? Is there some epistemological approach to education that's sort of neutral enough that you would say, yeah, that one is not going to do damage, at least? Because most people can't homeschool, right?
Okay, so I think that there are a variety of choices in terms of practical choices people have to make. I'm not saying everyone has to fit into one mold, homeschooling. Mm-hmm. And so you have to, every case is different. You have to examine every case. Some of them are going to do, private schools. Some are going to do public schools. Some are going to do homeschooling, whatever. The question is, in those contexts, what is happening? Is there actually a formation of the soul and mind, right, or is there just a preparation for a living in a society which right, is not forming people according to the truth of things? Right. So I'm not saying everyone, and I don't think everyone can homeschool. I'm not sure every kid can homeschool. But I would say this is going to be a little bit heretical. I would prefer my child remain uneducated than to be educated according to the form of much of public education.
So I think I might agree with you. Well, because here's the problem: as a historian and also as a trained educator and Ivy League, yada, yada, I can tell you this. We're just training people, and have been for 150 years, to become consumers. It's really the goal. That's really the goal. When you walk in at K and you leave at 12, you really want to become someone who can do some basic logic, use your mind in order to find the things that you want in life and consume them. That's really kind of what happens. There is no formation of the soul.
If you go back to the beginning, you go back to the roots of contemporary compulsory state education, it was never about a formation. It was never about truth. No. It was never about higher ideas, philosophies, anything. It was about preparing someone for the system of the state and of the society so that they function well in that society. That's what it was all about, and it still is. And when you see the explosion of compulsory state education in the 1920s, where do you see that? In communist Russia, in Nazi Germany. Why? Because they want to use the educational system for the formation of their utopian schemes.
Yeah, but be careful. But they're even borrowing from the German tradition of public education, which wasn't communist per se, but it's the same concept, which is we're going to form society by educating them into our institutions. So
starts at the end of the 18th century, in I think it was Bavaria or one of the German states.
Yeah, that's right.
That's where it all starts. And there was not this idea the state had that responsibility up to that point. Look at most people were educated privately for the vast majority of the history of the world, and they were educated by tutors, and they were educated by their parents.
Yeah, if they were educated at all. But of course, it's an odd idea because they're being educated anyway, right? Like the kids I know in Mali or in Sierra Leone, they're being educated. It's kind of nonsense. They go to what we'd call an industrial school until about fourth grade, and the girls go till about first or second grade. They learn their letters, they learn to add, and then in the real faraway villages, you know what happens? They stop going, but they go into a whole new type of education. It's a naturalistic education about how life works. They learn about soil and seeds, and it's a whole new world. I always hated that when people say they're uneducated. No, they're not industrialistically or whatever the word is educated.
Yes.
So
yes.
But it's quite a burden. It's quite a burden. See, this is the martyr concept coming all the way back around. There is a type of martyrdom to not investing in that system. You really do have to take a punch, and your kids are going to be one of the punchers because they want that. They know it. They see it on their phones. They see it on the TV, the television screen. They see it with their friends. It's a cross. No,
I can tell you that being a true struggling Orthodox Christian is the greatest revolutionary act in the 21st century, at least in my perspective, in the Christian world, in the Western world. I can't speak for other cultures and societies, but in other words, you're right. It's a total revolt and a struggle, a lifelong struggle against the zeitgeist, against the powers that be, the mentality that rules most of educated / popular society. Because they're indifferent to ultimate things. That's what it comes down to. They're indifferent to the ultimate question.
Here's some good news: it's gonna. Even the public institutions, let's just call them the nihilistic or quasi-atheistic, whatever, secular. They're going to start reaching out for meaning. I can tell you, I've been in schools where they're bringing in wellness. It's just a code for, can we please have a spiritual conversation before we all die? And you know what? Everyone's like, I feel like I'm dying. You feel like you're dying too? And then wellness is like somehow generic enough that it passes through the strainer that is the technocracy. And somehow the technocrats are like, well, wellness seems important. And then it's suddenly being taught.
People need to ask, why did we get to the point where we are afraid to have a frank discussion about reality? That's what it seems like. People are afraid to sit down and talk like, hey, what's the meaning of life, folks? You can't do that. No, you're a heretic. You're a religious fanatic, something. I don't know what it is.
Well, I think it puts you on the transcendent plane, and it puts you suddenly having to go up. And now all of a sudden, are you telling me there's an up? I'm telling you there's an up. That's why you feel sick, because you keep denying it. And I do too. Can we not be sick? Can we go up? And people are like, oh God, up. Am I going to get fired?
Yeah, that's going to be happening on a much more mundane levels. That's happening. That's been happening for generations on that level. But it's going to be on more mundane levels. Like if you even imply there's a truth about something that the rest of us say, no, there is no truth. There is no reality. You're going to deal with that. So I think it is going to cause a massive reaction. I think it is already causing a massive reaction.
I agree.
Yeah.
You'll see it now. You'll see, I think, public institutions of education they're bending around, but they don't know what to do, of course, because there's no tradition to pull on. And if you pull on the Protestant tradition, which might be the only one available here in America.
Is there a Protestant tradition?
Well, so if you try to tug on that and return those ideals back into the school, no one's buying those these days. It's going to be a postmodern. There's, like a lot of cats are saying on the internet, Orthodox people, I think this is true. There's an emerging God. And I don't know what it is, but it's emerging. There's a divinity emerging. And, you and I as Orthodox might say it's not God, obviously, but there's an emerging sense in people's souls that I need something bigger, and that will be rewarded with something, I think, scary, though. This is right. Something that they're going to call divine, but it actually may be anti-divine, right?
Father Seraphim Rose said it all 50, 60 years ago. You got to read his writings. They're prophetic. It's so perceptive. He said, capitalism and communism, systems that at that time seemed like they were going to be eternal, right? They were like given all around the world. There were two systems. He said, both of them do not satisfy the human person. They are not going to be the ultimate answers. Something else will come to replace that. Will have a spiritual dimension to it, but it will not be the God of Revelation, the God of the Christian tradition. It'll be the Antichrist, ultimately, is what he talks about. And that's scary for a lot of people.
Bum, bum, bum. Put it in, Andrew.
Well, people don't want to go there. I know. Don't go there. Don't go there. But
I didn't say don't go there. Heavy things lightly, man. No. How do we do lightly with Antichrist? Andrew, put in some light music for the Antichrist. No, it's not possible. I'm with you. And maybe we shouldn't even be joking about it, obviously. But,
yeah, well, here's the thing that people also, that's all distorted too. The Antichrist is something that's been around for 2,000 years, not something that's coming in the future. But that's a whole different discussion.
It's not Jeff Bezos.
No. No. Jeff's a little too, man.
He's just a regular guy. Just a regular guy with like more money than, say, you and I put together. No. If you put all of our money together, he still has more. Can you believe that? My daughter has more money than you and I put together. The guy I saw at the car wash has more money. Go ahead.
The good or bad news, depending on who it's for, is that none of that matters when he goes to the grave. He's not taking any of it with him.
No, he is not.
Well,
we've been on now for just about 49 minutes or so, and I think we should stop. But I think you'll come back. It's really good when you're here. Plus, I feel like now Mom's really happy, and we can say we talked.
Well, unfortunately, we don't talk much outside of these online discussions, which is
we do little. Okay. What's texting? What's texting?
Yeah, scary. Texting. Yeah, they're great. Yeah,
texting feels like if you were playing in class AA ball and then called it baseball. Yeah, kinda, but not exactly. It's not really talking, but I do it. I know you do it. It feels like
I wanted to ask one. Can I add one last thing before we close? Is that or is there a time limit?
Watch this. No. Oh. Yes, you can. It's just fun being your big brother. No, you can't. Yeah, no, go ahead. Remember when you yelled at me and you said I'm a priest and that means I get to talk? I remember that. That was awesome.
Did I say that? Really? I think you must have been really.
I think I was Tamada, and you were like, "No, dude, I get to talk because I'm the priest." And I was like, "Well, I'm the Tamada," and you're like, "I don't even know what that is." So stop talking.
Oh, that was one of those. One of the Georgian dinners things. I think I went to one of those.
It was Papu's funeral.
Right. Yeah. And I just want to say that the whole question of
finish it up. Do it.
What's coming? I think actually there's, we can all like paint a really black, awful picture. Because there seems to be a trend that is pretty frightful. But I actually think that, like you said, there's going to be a turnaround. I'm optimistic, not ultimately optimistic for this world because it's going to end, and the fallenness of this world has to end eventually, and there has to be a new heaven and new earth, and all the rest. But short term, I'm actually optimistic that. There's going to be a huge reaction, but not just that. There's going to be a divine intervention in history, and there's going to be there's going to be a lot of surprises. And I would say that the next 3 years are going to be some of the most amazing years of my life, probably of centuries. I think it's going to be just a roller coaster for all of humanity, and a lot of heart-wrenching things are going to happen, already happening. But there's also going to be a lot of hope that's going to appear. And so I think people who are struggling for the truth, who are struggling for the truth of Christ, the truth about everything on the intellectual level, but also on the spiritual level, I think we should be prepared for the worst, but hoping and looking for a very bright intervention of God, because I think ultimately God is philotimo. In other words, he loves us, and he's just, and it's only going to go so far before there's going to be reaction. Mm-hmm. So I think,
that's I can't see anything other than that. I mean, only because where there's things dark, there's things light. Otherwise, it wouldn't make any sense if it's all just enveloped in utter darkness. So, but the opportunities for light, yeah, they're coming. And in some ways, right, it's all better than the gray. And in some ways, the capitalist consumerism has been gray. Somehow you can live a really good Christian life and also just like acquire. Yeah.
Two masters. That's how people have been living. It's all coming to an end. The days of superficial, happy-go-lucky or Christian life are over. It's either hot or cold.
You heard it right here, ladies and gentlemen. The happy-go-lucky days of regular old Christian life are
serving two masters. Hey, don't you think? I mean, look at that. Can you see society? Doesn't, you got to either choose one or the other today.
I joke only because it's sort of my role with you and in life. But I tell you, man, beneath the laughter is reality, and it's there. I agree. It's also beautiful. It's Dostoevskian for me. Everything goes back to that cat where you're like, wait, this is disastrous. And you're like, wait a minute, look at that flower that grew out of that. Look at the flower that is Raskolnikov at the end of Crime and Punishment. This is the dirtiest dude in history, and now somehow he's repentant, and it was through the life of a prostitute. It's crazy beautiful. So I can live with that, man.
Yeah,
so
that's the gospel.
Yeah, that's it. So, all right. Let's finish up by saying, go to this cat, my brother, Father Peter. He has a really beautiful online presence. And there you're teaching a course on the Russian new martyrs. I'm going to jump in there.
I actually want to get involved in your offline course. You got an offline course too.
I do. Some would say I'm copying you. Others would say I'm just slow to the trend. But
no, it's good.
Yeah,
I think that's where you. This is great too, but I think that's where you go deeper, don't you?
Yeah. So I want to invite everybody to that. Thanks for letting me do this real quick. We're going to do a class called What is a Conspiracy? We're going to start in early July and go through the summer. And basically what this is for folks of First Things who contribute in a recurring fashion. Could be once a year, once a month, but recurring money for our nonprofit work, for sending people out into the field. Recurring money is like the gold standard because I can count on it in terms of budgeting. And so if you join as a recurring donor, doesn't matter how much, then come join us on Wednesday nights, and we're going to talk about conspiring. What is it to conspire? And is it maybe not exactly what people say it is on, say, Fox News and CNN? Like, what actually is conspiring to do something? So we're going to look at that historically and spiritually. Those are on Wednesday nights, but not till July. We just did a course. Thanks for saying that, brother.
Can I come in and do a guest appearance?
What if you just came in as a student, though? He'd be like, I want you to be the dude over there in the cassock, like, but can you help me clarify? I want you to do that, but actually where you don't know, but like where you do know, and you're like, could I ask a question?
I think it's a great topic. That's why I want to get involved, because I think it's a really good topic and it's very timely, and there's so much misinformation about it. It's just crazy. It's just a slogan for most people.
Well, first of all, yes, you as a guest speaker on that would be fantastic. Really, though, seriously, because one thing about the Greeks is people know overseas, especially in old Orthodox countries, conspiracy is a whole. I would actually, let's plan on it, because the way you always frame conspiracy to me, Americans like get all sad about it, but it's like a reality in most of the world. Everyone kind of knows something happened on 9/11, but in America, nobody will talk about it. But overseas, conspiracy is a whole different thing, right?
Oh yeah, and it's part of the old world. It's because it's the old world, new world thing. I think there's aspects of it that just like, of course, because that's how people live. Like, there's obviously working together on some level. Now, what level, how deep, all those are different questions. But is there such a thing as a conspiracy? Of course there's a conspiracy. It's ridiculous. Right. Anybody who doesn't believe that there are people working together for common aims don't live in society. Like, we all do. People work for common goods, for the common good. They're conspiring for good. There's people doing that. And we accept that, of course, But
you mean there were two people on a Zoom call trying to fix that orphanage and they didn't tell anyone?
Yeah,
those conspirators.
Anyway, it's a good topic. I hope it goes well. I hope people sign up, because it's. We're getting to the point where you can't have an intellectual, frank discussion anymore, or you're going to be censored, or you're going to be, I don't know.
Well, let's do it. Let's. What we'll do is we'll get back together on the pod. We'll do a whole thing on conspiracies, and then that'll lead us into the class. And then here's the other thing for you: keep going, brother, because it ain't easy. And, teaching the faith is not hard. It's not easy. And keep going. And your family's up there, and I love them. Say hi to them, and we'll check you soon, okay?
Yeah.
Let's keep in touch.
Join me, as you said, on New Martyrs of Russia and the Catacomb Church. Everybody needs to come and learn about these examples. They're extremely important for us today. That's why I'm doing it. 10-week, just started.
Yeah, just started. Hop on there. Orthodox Ethos, I'll put it in the pod notes. Thanks for coming, Father Peter. Sheni Skuggy Marjos to that guy, Father Peter Heers, my brother. That means to you the victory. That's set at the super table or the KP table in Georgia, which every one of you is invited to do one of these with us or with anybody. You should just go. But Georgia's far, but we can bring it to your house. It's such a beautiful party, and I'm not joking. We'll come. You put 20 people there, we'll come. We'll have a party. We'll share awareness about what we do, but mostly we'll just have a party. Invite us. WAWTAR is produced by Andrew Schwark and Daniel Paternos, FTF guys. Our pod is brought to you by the creators of First Things Foundation. We're happy to have had Father Peter on board. And most of all, we're just happy to be at work because we have people like you who support what we do. Share WAWTAR with friends, hit the thumb up button, and do all that. Peace to you. Nakvam dis, hasta luego, and au revoir.